So, Dave, while you were busy yesterday fielding calls from heads of state worldwide, the Pope, everybody else who wanted to get in there and give you their good regards, I was preparing a
Putin.
gift for you. I prepared something for you, and it's your very favorite thing. I prepared a series of lists, Dave. I have lists for you to give you today that you're going
You
to
know
get to
me well.
react to.
You know me well, right?
I've got a series of lists, and they're not just lists, they are win, place, show organized, Dave. I've got
Wonderful.
this all together for you. So we introduced
Splendid.
the topic on Monday, and it's one ring wonders. It is the players and athletes that had the biggest impact for winning one ring. We think about them, the biggest disparity in how we would think about them if they didn't win versus how we think about them because they did win. So I have organized it in 5 different categories for basketball, hockey, NFL, NBA, and college. And then Hall of All style at the very end, we were going to settle all hash and we were going to pick the win place show from all of sports that had the biggest
I
impact.
love it. I love it. Take it
All right.
away.
All right, so let's start with hockey because that is my weakest subject by far of this list, and I expect you to have a lot to say on it. So here's my win place show. I don't even have honorable mentions because I struggled to come up with 3 because I knew I would just be able to throw over to you and you'd be a depth of knowledge. My show for hockey, one ring wonders. Literally everyone on the 1980 Miracle on Ice team. The Miracle on Ice team, every single one of them, their life would be wildly different if they had not won that championship.
Ain't that
Uh,
true? Mike Eruzione. Who?
And so it probably should be the win, but I thought that would be mean to throw an entire team on it. The place, Ray Bork. Ray Bork, Boston legend, goes over to Colorado, wins a ring there. If he had
That's the
never got
funniest one, that's for sure. That they threw him.
yep.
They were so destitute as a sports town, Boston, at the turn of the millennium, that their old defenseman went to Denver, Colorado, won a Stanley Cup, and then when he came back to Boston, they threw him a parade. How
Yeah.
pathetic! Pathetic. I love it.
And then the win, maybe a little bit of hometown bias, but I think this is actually the right answer. It's Ovechkin. If Ovi doesn't get that one championship, how is he considered in history? He is considered the greatest hockey player to never win one.
Without like we've talked about, those guys, the names right now are Marcel Dion and Dale Hawerchuk. Likely those would be the 2 names you would float as the biggest names in NHL history who didn't win a cup. Greats, obviously first ballot Hall of Famers, but still not on the level of the Dan Marinos like we've talked about.
Oh, that's right. Am I correct to say if Ovechkin does not win that cup,
He's easily number 1.
He is right next to Dan Marino as the go-to reference for a great guy who never won in his sport. I think he is like 1A and 1B instead of it just being 1A with Marino.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, 100%. That's exactly right. And, you know, it doesn't apply as much, except that it is looming over 97 Connor McJesus's head. Year 9 now. He has now exceeded the time it took most of the legends of the game to get their first cup. So yeah, he's really going to be fighting against time and history if he doesn't rally this team in the next week or so. Yeah, he's really doomed. But as it is, that's a great call.
Okay, so you agree with my win, or is there any other names that you would throw on the platform here?
For single cups, I think that you nail it. Raymond Bourque is a pretty good one, and then we start to get into, because the nature of it as hockey goes, anybody, a casual fan probably has picked up on the fact that they tend to come in bunches. You know, Crosby and Malkin go back to back. Before that, Lemieux and Yager go back to back. The Oilers win 4 in 5 years. I think it's an interesting historical note that one ring, one Stanley Cup. Subtly, I don't think Gretzky has been taken to task that much, but I do think it kind of exposes that he was essential to the formula for winning, given the fact that he leaves, moves to the Kings, and Messier and company win the cup without him. I think that says something about how good, I mean, obviously says that that roster was plenty good, was an all-time great roster, that they could win without their best player.
All right. So I'm going to get off the hockey just before I embarrass myself. I'm sure you can go a lot longer. Maybe you, Hench, and Spaghetti can see if I missed any names there and do your own over at -3.
Well, as far as that goes, it is funny, though, because Messier comes into my mind with both of those cups, that he wins that one in 90 without Gretzky. And then in 94 wins it with the Rags, and then becomes like the sort of, I mean, I think he would be, sort of like Hench referred to Scottie Pippen on the Bull. I mean, like that is Messier's role in the context of the Edmonton Oilers, but he is a completely different level because of doing what he did with the Rags. So if you take that
Yeah.
cup away from him, which does feel singular, even though he won all those cups in Edmonton, he would be regarded very differently.
It's funny. I actually forgot he was on those Edmonton teams because I wasn't watching as much hockey in the 80s. So Messier was somebody I wrote down and then Googled it. And I was like, oh, yeah, the guy's won like 5 or 6 cups. So, like, he definitely can't be what we are talking about, which is one ring wonders. So, sport I know a little bit better, Dave, basketball. Here I do have some honorable mentions, and we'll start with a guy. Well, actually, we'll end with him. My honorable mentions are mostly old heads, and I don't know if this is recency bias, but they didn't make the platform. I just don't know how many conversations we're still having about Oscar Robinson and Moses Malone, but those guys did only win 1 ring. Like, they might have joined like the Barkley and the Karl Malone category if they hadn't won one. So I think they definitely deserve a mention. Oscar, Dr. J, Moses, and then the one I took off because there's going to be a lot of tributes that come pouring in. And the tribute I can is to not put him on the platform, but it's Jerry West. Jerry West did win the one, even though he went 1-8 in finals. But the reason, not only, because RIP and passing the legend is one of the great basketball careers ever, when you consider all the way from college through the front office, like he's had a big impact on round ball as anybody who ever lived. But the reason I took him off here is he got character assassinated anyway. Like, they come out and do that show on HBO where they turn him into this like raging lunatic who's just like a crazy person because he never won. Well, he did win, and they still treated him like he was a ringless wonder. So I think he doesn't deserve the podium just for that, but he's definitely got to be on honorable mention. So show Dirk. Dirk is got to be on this list. And how many can foreign players win championship conversations would we have had in the last decade in a vaguely xenophobic manner if he hadn't won that one with the Mavs?
I like that. That's a really good call. Shout out Bill Walton, not because he would be regarded differently, because he is already kind of like the way you look at his.
He's got 2 rings.
Oh, right. So he gets that one with the Celts anyway. So it's a moot point, but it is fun. Yeah. So the debunked what I'm about to say anyway, but yeah, that 77 title means everything. And it's kind of like we were talking about with the 2015 KC Royals the other day. Sometimes a single title stands alone and means everything to a region of sports America for all of time. And that's what that Trailblazers title seems to mean. And Bill Walton was at the head of that. And yet we still, despite the 86 and best 6 man and all that in 86 and the 77 title, you do feel like, man, the sports gods did not embrace him as much as they could have, but still even less if he doesn't get that. Same goes for that pitching staff in Atlanta. Are they, Glavin's obviously still a Hall of Famer. Maddox is Smoltz definitely a Hall of Famer? I guess the starting pitcher, relief pitcher, Jack Morris, who beats those Braves in 91, is not a Hall of Famer without the evidence of 10, without the 10-inning Game 7 performance.
Baseball's coming, baby. And you've already named one of the people on my podium personally. So to wrap up basketball though, place Jason Kidd. And this might be recency bias as well, but is Jason Kidd the coach of the Mavs right now in the finals if he didn't win that ring? If he was just a point guard who went through his career and never actually won anything, is he still in basketball, or is he working in like Spain right now in like Real Madrid's academy? I think he's had a massive impact on both his legacy and his future prospects by winning that title.
Good call. I like that one.
Final, top of the podium.
Also, and by the way, he also he is like can't miss kid, 5-star recruit and all that. Improbably on some level goes to Cal instead of all the schools, and he beats Duke in the midst of their run. I think, in fact, ends them, right? They're trying to three-peat. If I'm remembering that right, that's Hurley.
I'm going to step on that one. Yeah, he did end Bobby Hurley's career. Was Duke going on a three-peat at that point? That's the part I don't want to get wrong. I know they won at least the year before.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a signature. That's a massive win in sort of his narrative before he even gets to the NBA.
So top of the podium, a guy who built his entire personality on being so intense and being all about winning and all about the team, and just he'll do anything and he'll kill to win that title. And that's what everything he's known for. And he only gets one. It's Kevin Garnett. If Kevin Garnett does not get that one title, he is just a lunatic. Like, he was a great player, but he goes immediately in the Barkley category, goes immediately in the Karl Malone category. His legacy is like being able to jump from high school to pros, but then can high school players translate to the NBA and win titles? Also becomes a narrative, just like the foreign narrative comes with Dirk. And so because he built his entire personality about being so intense about winning, and he didn't get that ring, if he didn't have it, what happens to KG?
It's a fascinating point, and I think the same applies to Paul Pierce, right?
Good one.
Is he? Do we need the cutaways of him rooting on the current Celtics if he doesn't win one himself? Is he some luminary that Boston fans are backslapping if he didn't get that one? And as far as that goes, do we now, like a half generation, full generation past the, the three-headed monster requirement to win a title, Dirk being the exception and the 04 Pistons being the other exception, all the title winners are like these three-headed monster type of until very recently. Is LeBron held up a little bit higher because of what he did against Golden State a few years ago with the 3-1 rally? Because otherwise it's like, we get it, but you had to go to Miami to get it, and then you had to super team it kind of sort of in LA once again.
Well, Durant's doing this right now. Like,
Right.
is like LeBron might have Durant's reputation and legacy if he doesn't have that Cleveland title. And so I think, like, it's a different wrinkle of what you're talking about. Like, whose multiple title meant the best, or whose second or third title meant the most. And I think that is an entirely great show that we should do.
I know I'm screwing with the premise here, but like sort of the other side of the coin with all of that is Allen Iverson is, everybody thinks he's great and he's an icon of the sport and practice and all that stuff. But what if he beats the Lakers in that like, now he would be regarded on a completely different level than the one he's on.
Oh my gosh, reversing the question, who, if they had won that one final, would have made the biggest jump? Obviously, Barkley beating Jordan would also be on that list. Iverson's a great one. I don't know. Let me think about that one. Maybe next birthday.
Boy, I mean, that's a little side thing of everybody who Michael and the Bulls knocked off. That list of the carnage behind them. Think about that. That's a fascinating one. What that would have done for John Starks and Patrick Ewing, and what that would have done for Karl Malone and John Stockton, and for Peyton and for Kemp and for Chaz Barkley and company. I mean, that Suns team, Jazz were great, 60 win, Sonics team and all of that, Vlade Divac along with Magic. That would have been a great late chapter in Magic's career. But I think number one is how we would regard. People love Charles Barkley, the broadcaster. I think people have kind of forgotten what he was as a Sixer and Sun. But imagine, that is one of the better teams we've ever seen for one season, was that Suns team.
I'm way behind on movies and pop culture day, but I was watching The Marvels. Finally, I was catching up on that yesterday on the treadmill. I'm halfway through on the treadmill, but like, that should tell you all you need to know, is I was able to turn it off pretty easily. But she's known in that movie as the Annihilator. And that is what Jordan is to 90s basketball legacies. Because if we were doing the reverse here, we were doing win place show of people who didn't win rings, and like, the people who come to mind first, Barkley and Malone are win in place, and you're just arguing about the order. So, and that's directly because of Jordan for both. And Patrick Ewing might be third.
And here's one more little wrinkle to add to exactly that. Jordan ghosts the NBA for 2 seasons, and Akeem wins those ones, and they're not full credit as a result of that for a lot of people. Now, people like me have pushed back on that and said, in fact, Akeem and those Rockets would have beaten Jordan and company, which is a fun what if to play, but there is no actual evidence that that's the case. And as a result, now we kind of are like, yeah, you got him in the age of Jordan, but not against Jordan. So we're not going to count him for as much.
Kenny Smith, a giant benefactor for that, lands a 30-year television career, partly by making fun of Barkley for not having rings. Clyde Drexler makes the one ring wonder list, but you kind of forget he was even on that Rockets team and he didn't play the second year. And so tons of sliding doors. But let's
when you go mercenary like that, history does sort of asterisk you, whether you think it's going to or not. That people are like, yeah, that's when you just latched on. I know Tom Brady, even that one has a little bit of that vibe already to it. Like, yeah, I mean, you went down there, you chased a ring. Well, how much credit do you want for that, man? Come on.
All right, so in Marvel fashion, we are deep in the multiverse right now. Getting back to the prime timeline, we got baseball for Win Play Show. Honorable mention: Strasburg, who kind of sparked this conversation on Monday. Clayton Kershaw, for a modern player who finally got a ring and avoided a lot of the stink for him failing October after October after October. He was a tough omission. And then if you want to go old school, Willie Mays and Hank Aaron both got rings early in the 50s. If they didn't get those early rings and become, two of the most revered players in baseball history without those early rings, how would they have been considered later in their career? But again, a little bit of recency bias. I think Mays or Aaron could have made it, but people, I don't even know if they know if Hank Aaron won the 1957 World Series. We're kind of a little bit post-dated to that. So with a little modern bias, Show is my favorite athlete of all time, and I've got to put him on the podium. If Cal Ripken does not win in 83, he is the guy who showed up for work every single day of his life and lost. He did not win the championship. He just showed up time after time in an effort and in a complete exercise of futility. So he completely changes his legacy by getting that ring in 83. The place, it's Greg Maddux. You already said him earlier. I mean, he's kind of a placeholder for all of the guys that we're talking about here on this Braves team. But if the 95 Braves do not win that title, they are officially the Buffalo Bills. And Greg Maddux is definitely more of a legend than Jim Kelly because he got that one title. And then finally, in the win place for baseball for me, it's A-Rod. Like if A-Rod puts up all those numbers, all those stats, all of the money, all of the off the field stuff, like all the fame and all that, but he never gets that one ring. He is a prima donna punk for the rest of history who just did steroids. He is Barry Bonds. He is McGuire. He is Sosa. He is not a guy who is still trying to buy an NBA team right now.
Those are all great. I'm going to go with, in my window of lucidity, I'm going to say, although it's weird that the Oakland Athletics, not of the early 70s, but of the early 90s and the late 80s and the Bash Brothers and that dominant pitching staff, it's weird because they do get that one, but there's the earthquake against the Giants and all of that, and losing in 88 to Kirk Gibson's, and I'll get to them in just a second. But that A's team gets one, and you're like, oh, that would be embarrassing. Same thing you say about the Atlanta Braves, but like those Atlanta Braves, it didn't add up to more success. And so it feels like even though they got one, it's like, good thing they got that one, but it still wasn't good enough. In a way, it's almost like the Rodgers and Favre thing of like 30 years back to back, 2 total titles, same as Flacco and Dilfer, underachievement. But that 88 Dodgers title, up until they win it in the COVID year, and that is, I think we can all agree, only counts for half now. The COVID titles collectively just don't count as much as the others do. But what if you take away that 88 title? That's that's wild. The span of time between now so 88, so instead it's 81 with Steve Howe and all that. But that impacts, those guys aren't Hall of Famers though. Garvey's not in the Hall of Fame as it is, but 81, you thought that makes the case for him. The last thing, the last conquest was beating the Yankees, and it didn't add up to anything. So he ditches and goes to the Padres instead and still isn't in the Hall of Fame. I guess my point is maybe baseball players, and rightly, I think, are held to a slightly lower standard when it comes to title count. People understand that it's an individual endeavor to either be on the hump or be in the batter's box. That's, head to head, one guy versus another guy. But in the larger thing, like, you can't control. If you're a starting pitcher, you're only out there 1 out of 5 games. If you're in the batter's box, you're only 1/9 of the equation. So I think it's whereas hockey, basketball, like, if you're out, if you're the man, you can drive the whole thing. That's not as true of baseball.
I think if we're ranking ring culture, NBA is clearly one in ring culture, in my opinion. And then second, I would say is if you're a quarterback, it's the NFL. If you're
Yeah,
any
that's
other
right.
position, it's not. And
That's
then
right.
like hockey and baseball fall a little bit farther down. Hockey probably a little above baseball just because of roster dynamics and the number of people that are on the field at a
Well,
given time.
ironic though, because like I said about McGee, there's not a ton of evidence. Like, yeah, that guy just put the whole team on his back and carried them to the Stanley Cup, and yet there aren't very many guys who stand as all-time greats who never did that at least once.
So I'm saving the NFL for last because that's your bailiwick. So let's do college. Won a college championship and changed their legacy forever. If they hadn't, we think about them wildly differently. My honorable mentions are all coaches because coaches stay around so long that that's how their legacy is burnished. Like you don't ding a college athlete as much for only being around 4 years, anywhere near as much as you dig a coach who's been around for 2 decades. So honorable mentions are Boeheim, Izzo, Spurrier, and the toughest omission, Lou Holtz. If Lou Holtz does not get that one ring for Spaghetti's Fighting Irish, like, is he on ESPN all those years? Is he still, did we even know who Lou Holtz is? Or is he like every other Irish coach that Spaghetti is screaming about, but doesn't stand the test of time?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's exactly right, and same goes for not to speak ill of those no longer with us, but Raleigh Massimino and
Don't
Jimmy
don't step
V.
on don't step on my win, Dave. Jimmy Valvano, Jimmy V is my win in college. That guy
Well, you
was
said coaches, so I thought you might have already come and gone with that one, but yes.
no, Jimmy V, I think is the clear winner, right? Like, and thank God he won. Thank God he won. Like the amount he did for cancer research and like a good of donations and charity in America. Thank God he won that one ring. But if he does not win that ring, nobody knows who Jimmy V is, and so he naturally has to elevate. Like we still probably will remember Boeheim and Izzo and Spurrier and Holtz because of the success they had over a time. But without that one ring, I think Jimmy V I don't want to say he was like selling cars or anything like that, but his career was outside of basketball pretty soon after 83.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I think I know who the number one is because it's not just doesn't impact one human being. It defines not just one program. It defines 20 years of the entire sport.
Okay, well, let me give you my show in place,
All
and then
right,
let's
go
see
ahead.
if I if
Go
I
ahead.
missed the podium entirely. You can tell us who your number one is. My show is Danny Manning. Manning and the Miracles is still the go-to reference for one guy who puts a team on his back and wins March Madness. March Madness being, obviously the second biggest championship you could win in college. So I thought they needed to have a representative. I mean, a millennial might say Kemba Walker or somebody a little bit more modern, but Manning and the Miracles is still the gold standard for me. And then the place is Vince Young. Vince Young does not win that title for Texas, does not have that against USC. He ends up being a pretty big bust in the NFL. We are not eating at Vince Young steakhouses right now. He is just somebody who is like bumming around Austin and talking about how he was once the quarterback of the Longhorns, not one of the biggest legends to ever grace the sport. So I think that is a massive one in the place category. Did I get it, or do you still have your number one out there?
I think I can make a case for my number one here. It is Howard Schnellenberger. I wonder if the kids out there even know the name Howard Schnellenberger. Well, he is the godfather of what is now known as the U football.
Yeah.
As luminous a brand as there has been in what now 40 years. I think about it like it's a newfangled rise that Florida football now matters. That's been since Howard Schnellenberger. I all due respect to Bobby Bowden and what he built in Tallahassee, and they kind of rose up a little bit before the U did and before Florida kind of returned to relevance. But Schnellenberger starts all that. The Sunshine State's rise. He gets that team. They lose. I think it was their first game of the season to Florida. And then with Bernie Kosar, nobody knows who that kid is, looks completely unathletic with his afro and everything else. They go up against mighty Tom Osborne and the Huskers. Thank goodness Tom Osborne ultimately got justice and won his title the next decade. But in 83, they were one of the great teams you've ever seen. They play him in the Orange Bowl. To this day, some people argue the Vince Young versus USC game is number one. To me, it's Nebraska versus Miami in that Orange Bowl. It's a gem. You can still find it on YouTube. Go watch it, and you'll thank me later for that. But Schnellenberger wins that title. Bernie Kosar wins the national championship, and so launches the U's reign on the heels of Jim Kelly predates Bernie Kosar. But Bernie Kosar winning that title establishes the U obviously at a different level. Schnellenberger bails. That's when Jimmy Johnson gets in there, Dennis Erickson, all the rest of it, Vinny Testaverde, the Heisman trophies, all the big time stars on both sides of the ball, greatest drafts you'll ever see. All the rest of it starts with Schnellenberger and his pipe on the sideline down there in the early portions of the 80s.
That's why you're here, pal. So I know
Right?
we're
I mean, how are
doing
you going to
the
beat that
longest
one?
trendy ever. I would not have come up with that one. Longest trendy ever, but worth it for that tidbit. I'm having so much fun right now. I hope everybody is digging in with us. So let's get into the one that is deepest in your bailiwick. And I had a cheat code here, Dave, because I've already said it. Ring culture matters so much to quarterbacks in the NFL. Matters so much to quarterbacks in the NFL.
Called the QB league, right?
My entire list is quarterbacks. So I don't know if you would want to throw Randy Moss in there or Barry Sanders or anything else, but I do not think they are held to account to 1/10 as the people that are behind center. So my entire list is quarterbacks. I threw out 99% of the people who ever played football, fair or unfair.
I think it's fair. I mean, head coaches matter too if they, get their one versus, I mean, but it doesn't, Bud Grant, Marv Levy, where would they stand if they had gotten their one title? And yet, in the head, to make your point that quarterbacks are what ultimately matter, like Joe Gibbs, I've made the case before that it makes people cross-eyed when you say, who's the greatest coach of all time? Is it Tom Landry? Is it Don Shula? Or is it Chaz Knoll? Or is it, in fact, Bill Belichick? It's like, maybe it's none of the above because only Joe Gibbs did it with 3 non-Hall of Fame QBs. 3 times he won the title. Yeah, once, okay, maybe twice. Like, boy, this guy has something figured out that nobody else does. Did it 3 times.
Now you're giving me a birthday present, bringing up Joe Gibbs, one of my heroes. Way to go. I love it. So for my honorable mention, these guys did not make the podium. And by the way, I think my win is unassailable in this category. Okay. I'm going to throw that out there right now. I'm going to call my shot. But I think honorable mention, you got Drew Brees, who you brought up on Monday. It was another thing that led us into this conversation. Your new Lord and Savior, Russell Wilson, hero of the Three Rivers.
He's huge. I think he's further. You're breezing past him. I think he's huge on this list. Imagine if Russ didn't have a Super Bowl.
And so this is what I want to. I want to get through the list, and then I want to hear your podium because you might have Russ over some of the guys I have. Flacco, nobody knows who Joe Flacco is. He's Tony Eason if he doesn't have that title. Kurt Warner, if Warner doesn't get it, is he in the Hall of Fame? He's just a guy who put up numbers, but maybe he makes the Hall, but he's certainly not like in the status he is. Jim McMahon. Is definitely, in rehab somewhere. He might be in rehab anyway. I don't know. He might be sober now. I'm sorry, Jim. But that's what I associate you with besides the quarterback title as being a party guy. And then Steve Young, sneaky one. Steve Young without that one title is definitely not considered the way he is and the legend that he is. So that can bring me to the podium. And I cheated. I'm admitted to cheating. My show, I'm going Hall of All. You like to induct pairs. I don't think you can separate Favre and Rodgers in this category. I don't think you can put one in place and one in show or one in honorable mention and one on the podium. Favre and Rodgers are basically the same case for this list.
You take my answer basically with that because yes, I think it goes in some order, but Breeze is my show. Although, maybe it's fair to elevate him to second, which is a spot you don't want to be. Like Russell Wilson is only in the show slot because I think Breeze is perceived to be there are a lot of powers attached to him that I don't necessarily think he deserves. I mean, he is the guy when you talk about in the quarterback league in the 21st century, there's very little evidence if you have the man at the only important that really, really matters at QB in the NFL. And yet he had 3 straight people. Oh, they had a terrible defense. All right. He's the only cat who you hold up as a definite first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the all-time greats. 3 straight non-winning seasons. That's pretty lousy stuff. And, Brett Favre, like I said on Monday, Brett Favre doesn't throw an overtime interception in NOLA, and Adrian Peterson before that doesn't have a case of the fumbles in that NFC title game in whatever that was, odd 8 or odd 9. Drew Brees is Dan Fouts, never gets to a Super Bowl, never even plays for a Super Bowl. But I think you get it exactly right. Brett Favre is, this old school, like everybody loves him and he's having so much fun and he's trash talking with Warren Sapp and all that. And it allows you to kind of forget, boy, they only won that one. They only got that one title. And then that's obscured by the fact that his successor, Aaron Rodgers, for all of his shooting his mouth off about himself, presenting himself as some sort of savior and who would ever want to be in Green Bay if it weren't for me. And us winning and losing games in January ain't about me. It's about management failing and otherwise. However he wants to present it, the fact of the matter is it's been 14 years since he went to a Super Bowl. And a lot of that one Super Bowl appearance is owed to the fact that Caleb Haney of the Bears, remember, the Packers are at Chicago in that one, meaning they were not as good as the Bears that year. Jay Cutler gets hurt. He becomes the guy in the crosshairs. Why isn't he playing? He should be in there. This is a big game. They have to put Caleb Haney in, and Haney looks halfway decent. Talk about a great what if. The ball gets deflected, of course, and BJ Raji picks it off and runs it in, and that game is ended. What if the Bears win that game? It would have been the Steelers against Caleb Haney and the Bears. That would have equaled the Steelers winning the Super Bowl, obviously. Then Roethlisberger would have 3 Lombardis in the span of 5 years. And then there would be no doubt that it's like, well, obviously Roethlisberger, you see how guys benefit from a ring count. Like if Roethlisberger had 3 Lombardis by the time he was 30, you'd be like, okay, so it goes Montana, and Marino and Roethlisberger, right? Like, but here comes that Brady kid. So where does he factor in? That would be sort of the conversation right now.
Well, what if is a big reason for my place, David. You haven't mentioned him yet, but my place is a massive what if.
I think
it's Doug Williams. It's Doug Williams.
I thought you were going Steve Young. I thought I think the Steve Young call is a great one, but he's so dented by his predecessor that it almost doesn't matter unless he gets, like, the standard for him was he needed to get 2. He got the monkey off his back, but to really elevate to be compared even among 49ers quarterbacks, it's hard. You can't really be considered one of the very best ever if you're not even the number one on your franchise. Joe Montana outstrips him. So, right. So if he had gotten 2, it would be different. But yes, go ahead.
He ends up an honorable mention, but Doug Williams ends up in the second spot on the podium, because you want to talk about a guy whose legacy is entirely burnished by one Sunday afternoon. We don't know who Doug Williams is outside of the USFL guy if he doesn't win that title. And if he doesn't win that title, what's the next 10 years look like, or 20 years look like for black quarterbacks in the NFL? Like, for right or for wrong, and mostly for wrong, they were considered as the guys who couldn't win the big game or didn't deserve to have the spot or didn't that they couldn't play the position. He changes all of that, and it's because he won that we suddenly have a lot of great quarterbacks that followed over the next generation. So without Doug Williams winning that Super Bowl, he disappears and the entire league changes, and yet that is still not my number one, Dave.
Okay, now I'm anxious. Oh, I know who it is. I know who it is.
My number one, and I will prove it because I know his middle name, is Joe Willie Namath.
I just was saying Joe 3 there. I gave you
Willie Namath. You know his middle name? I don't know, Dave. Is Jameis Winston. I do not know Jameis Winston's middle name. And Joe Namath is Jameis Winston if he does not win that Super Bowl. He is a quarterback who did well in college at a good program, who was turnover prone and should have been benched halfway through his career. And instead, he is one of the all-time legends in terms of name recognition in the history of the most popular sport in America.
It's a great call. You're right. I'm not going to argue too hard with you on that. He did have to get that title because it's what the title meant beyond the name Joe Namath. He is a Manhattan Coxman Supreme with or without a Lombardi. Well, I don't even know if they gave him a proper Lombardi trophy. I don't know that. I remember when they first started handing that out. Anyway, yes, your point stands, but I do push back on the youngs who, because I caution olds about genuflecting too mightily to deeds of 60 years ago. But Joe Namath, you do need to point out when people are like, he threw more interceptions than he threw. Everybody threw interceptions. He was a gunslinger, and that was how he was defined. And so that's how he played. He's reared in the AFL days and all of that. But yeah, listen, he doesn't get that title. Yeah, that's a marvelous point.
All right. Well, I think that is the clear winner, but will he win the Hall of All in the ringless and the One Ring Wonders? So let's get to that. The final one, Dave. The people in all of sports who most benefited from winning one championship. I don't need to do an honorable mention. I kind of ran through it sport by sport. So just real quick, here's my list. Show, Jimmy V. Jimmy V is my show. My place is Joe Willie Namath. And my win, Dave, my win is someone we haven't talked about yet. My win is a surprise, a wild card entrant.
It's a golfer. It's a golfer who won a major golf championship, right?
No, sir. It is Buster Douglas. One night of his life means the difference between immortality and complete and utter obscurity. Name all the other guys that Tyson knocked out. He is the one guy that beat him. He loses his first title defense. He loses his first title defense to Evander Holyfield, never defends the title, never like re-wins the belt or anything like that. One championship, one night, we'll know his name forever, and otherwise nobody has any idea who he is.
It's a great call. It's a great call, except I am going to stand with, because of the amount of time it covered, and I'm going to cheat it, I am going Favre next to Rodgers. That's 30 plus years of the Green Bay Packers having never worse than the third best quarterback in the league. I mean, maybe the transitional year from Favre to Rodgers. But Rodgers has a big statistical year. Maybe he isn't as ripe as he then becomes, but still a high-end performer from the jump as he takes over from Brett Favre. 2 Lombardis. That's the same number as Dilfer and Flacco gave to Charm City, and nobody's holding either one of them up as greats. They got it. It feels semi-fluky. Things broke just right to get them. That's how you explain away those. I don't think either is. Now, Joe Flacco's career is enhanced by that financially because he gets that. Now the Ravens have to pay him out and all of that. But is he held up on some different level because he won that Super Bowl? I don't really think so. I think Rodgers and Favre, and Rodgers, I mean, like, the Jets were like, we found our guy. Now we finally have a winner. It's like, did you? He hasn't won anything in 14 years. He's won the same number of, he's been to the same number of Super Bowls as Dave's been to in the last 14 years. He can describe himself as a great champion, but he ain't. Or he's won some individual awards, ain't won nothing. And when you're the man, and when you're the MVP, and you're the one dragging a mediocre roster, guess what? You got to do your heaviest lifting in the divisional round and in title games. And you ain't done it in a long stretch, Savior.
So the Favre Rodgers combo, completely unbeatable for Dave. I am going with Buster Douglas, but it's either way, please send us an ear if you're still listening. I don't know if anybody is, Dave, but this is the most fun I've had on this show all year. Thanks for going through that with me.